Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for our webinar today, Charitable Gifts of Business Interests, Real Estate, and Cryptocurrency. My name is Nathan Stelter, president here at the Stelter Company, and I'm happy to be here today to introduce our presenter. But before I do that quickly, just want to say a few words about the series. Many of you are familiar with the webinar series, as we've done for quite a while, but as an expert advocate for asset-based giving, Stelter is really committed to providing innovative solutions and education for industry, and really pride ourselves on being this bridge builder for the nonprofit community. And as such, are happy to host these complimentary webinars and this one today, as well as a whole slate of webinars throughout the year, connecting you to experts from across the country to assist you in maximizing revenue across your portfolios. So today's webinar is actually the fourth of our 2022 curriculum. We also have presenters coming up later this year. Eddie Thompson, founder and CEO of Thompson Associates, revealing 13 characteristics of high propensity donors. Elizabeth Ayers, Executive Director of Planning at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. We'll be talking about how to convince leadership of the importance of your gift planning program. And Stacy Silman, who's the Chief Legal Officer and Vice President for Personalized Philanthropy for the American Committee for the Weizmann Institute of Science in New York City. She'll be providing strategies to make plan giving data work for you. So some really great topics, along with our previous ones that we did earlier this year. All that is actually available on our website, or will be available when those are done, but our archives are available at stelter.com/webinars. But do keep an eye on your inbox for invites as those get closer. So back to our talk today, I want to make sure we give all the time we can to our terrific presenter. Many of you know Brian and probably have heard him speak in other areas. He's founder and president of Charitable Gift Solutions, specializes in non-cash asset receipt and liquidation, gift annuity, reinsurance brokerage, along with a variety of other things. Brian and I just came off another call earlier with the CGP, the Charitable Gift Planners Leadership Institute, listening to some terrific speakers. And now really want to turn it over to Brian to give him enough time to get through a variety of great topics for discussion today. So Brian, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Nathan. And yeah, we're going webinar to webinar. I think we're all doing that these days. And not to make anything political, but I think I'll vote for anybody that will say there has to be a required law in all 50 states that there has to be a 5-minute break between Zoom meetings so we can at least jump to the next one so they're not so backed up. But really glad to be here. And I'm very excited to hear about your speakers. Obviously, it's a great slate, but sort of coming back to non-cash assets specifically, this goes to like you mentioned, Elizabeth Ayers, how to convince your membership around sort of plan giving these types of gifts. Eddie Thompson talking about, who the high propensity donors are and sort of the data-driven elements. Really, all of that fits perfectly here. So how you can convince, hopefully, your board and leadership that non-cash assets are where the money is, because it is, and finding those high propensity donors. And then obviously all the data in particular that Dr. Russell James and others have come out with, really just saying if you want to grow your charity revenue the fastest, have the highest and biggest ROI impact, non-cash assets are by far the best way to do that. So that's what we're going to talk about. So I was not going to talk about any of that stuff before, but sounds like a great slate coming up to, I think, perfectly complement or supplement, hopefully, what we're going to talk about. So you see the agenda right there. So I'm going to talk about the non-cash market overview, non-cash asset types, what I call the 5-minute non-cash tax seminar, some of the appraisal requirements, which are can be a bit unique, then some of the challenges. So this is usually where I would say, hopefully you're drinking the Kool-Aid at that point and going, oh my God, this is great. Why aren't more of these happening? There can be some bumpiness and challenges. So if you know what the challenges are, hopefully you know how to be able to work through them, and I'll be able to provide some specific advice there. And then have just a couple case studies. Gen 2 will be sort of the moderator, and I think Nathan might be jumping in as well, where my goal here is to have 10 minutes or so at the end for any questions. So any of the Q&A, I think you can just put right into the Q&A, and then Jen and team will be able to guide me a bit there at the end. So with that, I will jump right in. I love this topic. Many of you who know me know that for 28 years, this is sort of all I have done. And so if I'm on a plane and somebody says, what do you do for a living? I say, I help wealthy people give weird things to charity. And then, of course, they always have to say, what's the weirdest thing? And then I'm talking for 20 minutes, which I do not want to do. But I will be happy to talk with you about the weirder things and the things, frankly, that aren't as weird, but that are hidden in plain sight. So jumping right in then, we talk about the non-cash market overview. Whoop, went a little bit too far there. First, super important nugget, when you think about overall assets in terms of the balance sheet for affluent investors, more than half of those assets are in non-cash forms. And when I say non-cash, let's be very sort of simplistic and and clear about what I mean by that. That means not cash. You've sort of figured that out, I know, but that also means not publicly traded securities, no mutual funds, nothing easily liquidated. So we're really talking about non-cash, more illiquid and complex gifts. When you then look at the overall balance sheet, again, for the high net worth, the affluent investors, this has been pretty consistent. It's 6 to 8% of the overall balance sheet is in cash. Very important data came out about 2 years ago from the census report saying that it's 3% for average households. 3% of their wealth is in cash. So I'm painting the picture right out of the gate. This is the smallest piece of the overall balance sheet for everybody. Everybody. I find this interesting. In 2006 and 7, prior to the Great Recession, cash as represented at the balance sheet for affluent investors was 3 to 4%. So that doubled after the Great Recession. That's actually back down a little bit more recent data. It's like 5 to 7%. Wasn't material enough to make the change. Doesn't matter. Smallest piece of their overall balance sheet, good times, bad times, any times, is in cash. You then think about the aggregate stock market value. This keeps moving on me. It was moving in a good way. Now it's moving in a bad way. But roughly, we'll say $25 to $28 trillion if you were to mush all of the publicly traded exchanges and all of those stocks on those exchanges, and you mush them, that value is about $25 to $28 trillion. Then you start thinking about other non-cash forms. Real estate, as an example, alone is between 40 and 42 trillion in privately held real estate. Never mind private stock, never mind artwork, never mind gold, never all these collectibles. You sort of keep adding all of that up, and it's about 55 to 65 trillion. Big theme again, the non-cash illiquid complex market is about double that of the entire stock market. And sort of setting that pose. Of the $390 billion or so donated last year, again, that's in the aggregate, non-cash estimates are about 6 to 8%, sort of depending. Now, this is not thrift store stuff. This would be $5,000 or more donated that require a qualified appraiser to complete a qualified appraisal. So as a percentage, rather dinky, let's just say 5%, let's say to keep the math simple, on 400 billion, that means 20 billion. So when you nominalize 5% on 400 billion, that's 20 billion in 1 year donated in this way. So on that level, and I should also say, so important, another gigantic theme, that most all of these gifts, and I mean a freakishly large amount, are going to an incredibly small number of charities. So we have a whole white paper that we put together on this. This is not a joke. Eight, like one more than 7, 8 charities in the Philanthropy 400, 8 of them were doing 75% of all private business gifts. 8 of them. And about 12 charities were doing 50% of all real estate gifts. So if you told me, here's a dozen charities that are doing 50 to 75% of all non-cash gifts for the largest 400 charities, that's actually accurate. And that portion, for what they are doing, is growing parabolically. So I have a whole little slide just on that. Wicked exponential growth, but to a super small, hyper-concentrated number of charities. Now, to take a bit of a step back, this is, I think, very, very important. So another gigantic nugget is, why is this growth occurring? We have baby boomers retiring every day. How many? Tons. So you see this data all the time. All the baby boomers are retiring. What I would suggest is, most people don't take the second question and say, what are they retiring from? Oh, their jobs. Well, what does that mean? Many of them are retiring from real estate or real estate portfolios. Now they're 74, they're sort of getting tired of all that stuff, and they want to divest. Or they've created their own private business, and now they're doing business succession planning, some level of exit planning, doing merger or acquisition, maybe going IPO. They're exiting. So when they're exiting something that they have assets that have appreciated over time, that is when they're starting to say, we're actually going to then sell, at least until recently, an incredibly low interest rate environment. It still is. with liquidity where? Everywhere. So you have tons and tons of buyers as these retirees are exiting through the turnstiles with these kind of assets that the buyers want to buy because of all the liquidity. And they're also at this stage very, especially at the higher net worth level, very charitable. So they're taking a portion of these assets, contributing that to charity at the time they're making this sale. I view this as the perfect storm, and we saw it in spades last year. Perfect storm. You have donors who are charitably inclined with the most tax optimal assets ever, all sort of coming through the turnstile at the same time, sort of through that exit retirement path, when interest rates are super low, which actually appreciates or inflates the assets that they own at the very time there's liquidity everywhere, people want to buy those things. I mean, that is planets aligning perfectly. So that's where you see this, I'd call it a mega trend that has been really building over the last 4, 5, 6 years. And I hope it's not peaking, who knows, but it is crazy how fast it's growing. So going then back to this piece, half of investors, affluent investors' assets being in non-cash assets, here is a wonderful chart from the Federal Reserve. Now, the only thing I don't like about this chart is somebody loved blue. We went a little OCD on blue. So I got 14 shades of blue. We got other colors, but anyway, they just liked blue. I didn't do the chart. So I love this visual. From the Federal Reserve, you have the net worth tier, so $10,000 net worth household, $100,000 net worth household down to $1 billion. Then you have the types of assets for that net worth tier. So green, bad. Green is cash. Green is dinkiest for all of them, and it gets dinkier and dinkier. Cash small gets minuscule. What then I am thinking, if I'm a fundraiser, what did they say? Willie Sutton, who was a famous bank robber, you've all heard this quote, I hope, and they say, Willie, why do you keep robbing banks? Because that's where the money is, was his quote. Where is the money? Where is the wealth for a charitably inclined person? It's not in the green. It's in the darkest blue. I have to say all these weird shades of blue. Darkest blue. What is darkest blue? Business interests. What kind of business interests? Private. No, Brian, I think those are public. No, they're not, because that's public. That's publicly traded stock. This is private business interests. What's the next darkest shade of blue? Say that 5 times fast. Real estate. It doesn't take a statistician to take a look at this to go, this is telling a very interesting story. At the $1 million net worth, you see this amount in green cash. Let's just say publicly traded stock. Okay, that's this little lightest blue. Privately held business, real estate. Probably what, triple the green and the lightest blue? Quadruple is more. As you go up the wealth tier, it starts to swamp it out like crazy. This is where we live. Where do 92% of all the gifts in this country come from? Cash. That is a level of 10th degree insanity in my view. If you're trying to, back to Elizabeth Ayers, talking about how you convince your leadership, type in, I do it right now when I'm talking, frankly. Type into Google right now, Cash is Not King by Dr. Russell James, executive summary. And it is a magical 2-page summary showing exactly what his incredible paper showed in terms of looking at the data for those charities that grow the fastest are decreasing the amount of green and increasing this amount. This is not like calculus 3. This is the smallest piece. Hurts their lifestyle the most when they make a gift of cash, is the least tax-effective way, 99.9% ever, to make the gift. And so when they're doing this, they're using the smallest piece of the overall balance sheet to do these two other not good things, versus the lowest cost basis, most highly appreciated long-term capital gain property that they have, which is this, and they just so happen to have more of this than everything else. I hope you're picking up on the theme. Guess how many charities in the whole country are locked into this? About a dozen. And those dozen are growing like crazy. So here's a quick example of that. So There are 3 charities, all donor-advised funds. I created one. We have 2 evil competitors, and we like them, and they're super nice. Talk all the time. And so this is sort of the exponential growth of non-cash gifts, not cash, not publicly traded securities. For three charities, one more than 2, 3 charities, you can see the total non-cash contributions in 2010, $108 million. Just to these 3 charities by year, you see the growth from 108, 4 times, double, up there, almost double, 2.31 billion to 3 charities only in illiquid or complex gifts. The average value you see is bouncing roughly between 1.5 and 2.5 million. These are not small. These are big. Another example of what we did last year, I'm just from a perch, just giving you some perspective. This isn't good or bad. This is our perch. So for those charities that we have a number of competitors, kind of community foundations do this, donor advised funds do this, religious foundations do this. Lots of groups can help support charities that come across a donor, perhaps after Eddie Thompson's talk, who are high propensity donors. They're really excited about your mission, want to have maximum impact. Maybe they're getting ready to sell real estate, sell their privately held business interest, and they didn't even know this was an option, that they could take a piece of that and donate that to you first. You might be able to take that in directly. Fantastic. Or you might want to use a third-party charity like ours or all these other ones that are out there to help potentially facilitate the gift. So the super quick thing here you can see is 100% of the gifts that we do are declined by other charities. Also, maybe important, it took about 1,900 referrals we received last year, about 8 to 10 a day, to create 261 donations. So there are a whole lot of rabbits down a whole lot of trails. It's about 8 to 1, always 8 to 1, 8 prospective calls or inquiries for every one that actually closes. But it was just under $1.2 billion. This is horrible and weird to say. I run this charity out of my house, did pre-pandemic and everything else, kind of weird. And now I think we're the 35th or 36th largest charity in the country. That's, to me, very odd. So 261 donations, just under 1.2 billion. That average is about 4.4 million per donation. What were the donations? These were the donations. So the 261 sort of deconstructed. You can see real estate was about 1 a week for 42 million. Business interests, which are by far the largest chunk of that, you can see. Then that's deconstructed. C Corp. S Corp is a bit understated because we took in a lot of LLCs that were also taxed as S Corps, which makes them S Corps. So it's about 50-50-50, very, very close to that. 50 C Corps, 50 S Corps, LLCs taxed or electing as S, and then 50 either LLCs or LPs taxed as partnerships. Cryptocurrency, that's in the title, so I have to talk about it, right? Everybody wants to talk about cryptocurrency. I've got 2 free webinars on my website. I'm happy to send them to the Stelter team. They can sort of post them if they'd like. But it goes through all of this, only to say, and this is not a joke, it's 8 to 1, 8 prospective conversations for general non-cash contributions for every one that closes, unless it's crypto. 35 to 40, everybody thinks that's exaggeration. It's not an exaggeration. We tracked it. 35 to 40 phone calls or emails about a cryptocurrency designation for every one that went through. Painful. We still did 37, like, oh, that's a lot. 28 million, that's a lot. I'm not saying it's not a lot. Those are 37 gifts otherwise that may not have happened, so I'm not being bad about it. That's less than 2% of what we raised last year. But it was about 75% of all the questions. How does this work? What can we do? Oh, painful, painful. So definitely want to have sort of cryptocurrency in the mix. Again, I do whole sessions on this. Only thing you want to know about cryptocurrency is this. 1, Bitcoin and Ethereum are the big 2 that's going to represent 90% of all gifts. Just focus on those. Even if you don't want to do those, we can for a fee. There are a number of national donor advised funds that will do it without a fee. If you called me today and said, oh my gosh, this donor wants to give Bitcoin tomorrow, not sure why, it's getting pummeled, but they want to give a Bitcoin gift tomorrow, oh my God, we're freaking out, board's freaking out, everybody's freaking out, simmer down. They can call another donor advised fund, do it for free in a day, and then have that full proceed granted back to you. Done. You don't do anything. None of the processing, none of the wallet. Ugh. If you start doing a lot of those, maybe look at something like the Giving Block or Endowment. I think Free Will just came out with a platform. Number of different vendors that are out there, and Given is another number of vendors that have sort of these platforms. But for most of those, you need to have volume, not volume of inquiries. Everybody's focused, like, God, I've had 8 conversations. Okay, when you have 50, you'll do 1. So it's like, you gotta have a lot of conversations. And everybody acts like they want to do it until you say, okay, we're ready. You ready to go tomorrow? Oh, not tomorrow. I want to do this when Bitcoin hits 200,000 a token. So no. And I think that's going to happen in a week. So I just need to be ready now. Like, you will never have another conversation with that donor. I'm being bad. I'm becoming a grumpy old man, whatever. What's my big theme? Everybody wants to talk about cryptocurrency. It's 2% of what we saw of completed transactions when cryptocurrency was booming, all-time highs across all tokens. 2%. Nobody has the same energy. I'll say it. I don't care if it's being recorded. Nobody has the same energy, excitement, intentionality of having conversations about real estate and having conversations about business interests. I don't have people getting all excited about, we're going to do a committee to talk about business interests. I didn't have that call once last year. I had about 80 about cryptocurrency. Stop chasing the super flashy, fresh thing. I get it. It's new. It's exciting. What is it? Everybody's all excited. Whatever. All you need to focus on, where is the big dark blue? And that's business interests, and the next dark blue, real estate. Focus on that. We know how that works. Not enough, because only a dozen charities are receiving massive gifts in this space, and nobody else is participating. And I don't think that's much of an overstatement. It isn't. And all of you thinking, I know this one group does a really good job. Okay, right now, while I'm here on the webinar, go on GuideStar, yank down their most recent 990, whip down to Schedule M. It's a one-page schedule, and it will tell you exactly how many non-cash gifts that they received, the type that they received, and the total value. And I bet you will be shocked at how few most charities are. We looked at the SEC, all SEC universities in 2017, and at least on their Schedule M's, unless they did it wrong, which I don't think they did, the total number of real estate gifts for all SEC universities for all of 2017 was 2. Combined 2. And that includes separate supporting orgs. I get it. They're separate foundation. 2. So that would not include any CRTs, something like that, but in terms of direct gifts. And they'd be like, oh, no, Brian, you're wrong. It's 7. Okay, it's 7. It's crazy. So you get the point. Simmer down on the crypto, in particular when everything's so low. Even if you want to get involved, Bitcoin and Ethereum, all you need to work with. And if you start getting actual transactions of maybe 1 or 2 a month, good luck. You'd be in the top 0.0001% of charities with that kind of volume, especially of larger ones over $5,000. Then if you start doing that, then you start looking at platforms and other ways to make it more efficient. You start doing more than that, you can create your own wallet, as an example. But very few transactions are actually occurring, but the number of presentations that I'm even making, articles, the noise around it is extreme. But the actual transactions we're seeing, it's the peanut butter and jelly, blocking and tackling, business interests, and real estate. There. Ta-da. I will probably get on another soapbox here in a second, so I will forewarn you. So what are the specific types? So we've really hit this already, so I'll cover this pretty quickly. Real estate. Now, one thing I want to be so clear about, and I even made myself a reminder to stick it in parentheses under this, and that is this can be a minority interest or a majority interest. About 75, big nugget here, 75% of all of our donations are not the entire interest. They would say, I love this charity, 20% interest in my LLC. I love this charity, 10% interest, undivided interest in my farm. They're not giving the whole thing away. They do sometimes, about a quarter of the time, but 75% of the time they are not giving the entire thing away. So, very important point, because so many charities, donors, and in many cases advisors think that they have to be super charitable. They have to give the whole apartment complex away. It's like, no, 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 no. They could give 1%, 10%, 20%. They just dial it up wherever they would want. So for real estate, you've got residential and commercial. By the way, what do you do to commercial or investment real estate every single year? You depreciate it. What does it mean to depreciate it? That means you take your original cost basis and you depreciate lower your adjusted tax basis every single year until such point in the future as it is zippo, zero for the depreciable portion of that real estate purchase. Wait a minute. The holy grail of all charitable planning is the lowest cost basis, zero or close to it, most highly appreciated asset, that is capital gain. Ding, ding, ding. These are the perfect holy grail of all charitable planning would be real estate with a super low cost basis that generally occurs over time because of both the combination of the appreciation of the property and the depreciation of the adjusted tax basis. You can see they're encumbered versus unencumbered. Encumbered, super pain in the butt. I've done maybe 5 of those in my entire career. That's code for debt. Some things that you can do, we can pay off the debt potentially. They can potentially, so there are a number of things. I have a webinar on that separately. But the point is, if it has debt and they're making a donation with the debt, I've done very few of those. Usually it needs to be less than about 20% or so loan to value. If it's higher than that, very difficult to sort of make that work on a couple levels. And then so privately held business interests, actually I must have tabbed that up a little bit. So we have privately held business interests, are C Corp, S Corp, limited partnerships, and LLC. So that's basically any stock that is not publicly traded. That's all you need to know. Now, one huge portion of this, I want to expand your thinking a little bit. We're talking about cash, then we talk maybe about publicly traded securities. Now we're sort of into sort of real estate, privately held business interests. We're sort of working our way across the balance sheet continuum. We currently own, I think it's 175 acres in Uganda, like Uganda. It was 3 years ago, about 30% of all of our donations were international stock. So we took in about $120 million captive insurance company in Bermuda. We took in a big portion of a cryptocurrency exchange, not the tokens, the actual exchange that was in the British Virgin Islands. So my whole goal here is to say the mega trend is occurring, whether you want it to or not. The assets that they have to be able to make charitably inclined are the largest piece of their overall balance sheet, and they own lots of weird things, just like you own lots of weird things. And those weird things can be potentially very conducive for charitable giving. And think beyond, when he says real estate, I think you mean that duplex that I can see from my campus. I do mean that, but I also mean a farm we took in Afghanistan at one point. We've got a very large portion of Central America. So it really, I want to expand your thinking way beyond what otherwise you might perceive to be possibilities for this charitable gifts. So again, real estate and privately held stock, at least last year, was about 95% of what we received. 95%. So just like the cryptocurrency, if you're going to talk about cryptocurrency, which was 2%, you focus on Bitcoin and Ethereum because that's where the money is. Don't worry about the other 1,000 tokens. Blah, just focus on those 2. I wouldn't even focus on those 2. I'd focus on the other 98% real estate and private business interest, which were 95% of the 98%. A lot of percentage there. You followed along, I know. Got restricted stock, which I won't talk about. Tangible personal property. If you can pick it up and throw it at somebody, that's my definition. That's tangible personal property. Artwork, jewelry, coins, all those kinds of things. Completely other section of the tax code. We do maybe 1 to 2%, if that, a year with tangible personal property. So possible, just doesn't come up that much. So then I always have weird stuff. So if somebody on a plane says, well, what do you do for a living? I said, weird, wealthy people, weird gifts. What's the weirdest stuff? So I will not go through all of these other than to say, very important, every single one of these weird things aren't, we got this call and we laughed about it and then nothing ever happened. Every single one of these things were completed donations. Every one. So you can see there sort of toward the bottom, NFL football team, that was a partial interest in the Minnesota Vikings when those sold. So they gave a 4% interest in the Minnesota Vikings Football Club, LLC. the Kansas City Community Foundation received the entire Kansas City Royals baseball team, the whole team. There's a Tulsa Foundation that I think took in $3 billion from a donor for oil and gas interests and cable company interests. We took in literally the sculpture of the bull on Wall Street, so that's charging bull number 1. So took that in as an example. You see other dead animals. We did 88 animals out of an estate. So a hunter from Hartford went to Africa, never missed a shot, unfortunately, brought all of those things back, had 88 varmints in his house, built a 5,200 square foot addition in his house. Can't make that up. Was not married, not sure why, but had the African elephant, 2 black rhinos, and the 85 friends. And then so we had to sort of go through the process of having to liquidate all of that sort of estate. Ended up being about $500,000 of value, but you can see here lots of different assets that people own. So every single one of these things we have actually taken in. So this is not theoretical in terms of sort of cases, if you will. So the next one is what I call the 5-minute non-cash tax seminar. And you can see right out of the gate, first bullet point, cash bad, everything else good. Why is cash bad? Least tax effective way to make a charitable gift. What's good? Anything that's the long-term capital gain asset that's increased the most. So I already hit that now 4 times. I might hit it one more time. Capital gain property given to a public charity, like pretty much all of you, or to a donor advised fund, which is a public charity sponsor, full fair market value deduction, and an elimination of capital gains tax. And all of you might be thinking, wait, that's kind of how Amazon stock works. It's the same thing. 0 difference from a tax perspective. What is the fair market value of Amazon stock? That's the deduction. When the charity sells it, no capital gains tax. For most all, not all, but most all of these non-cash gifts, it's the same thing. Now, the process is different. So how do you determine fair market value? They have to have an appraisal, which is the next slide. And then just sort of the process itself of due diligence, being excuse me, I'm going to take a little sip of water here. I got myself fired up. So the due diligence process, reviewing the actual case and design, selling process, all those things are different, but from a tax perspective, exactly the same. If donated to a private non-operating foundation during life, so typically a family foundation, all you need to know is super bad. That's basically a basis deduction instead of getting the fair market value deduction. It's the lesser of the two. Public charities also don't have the 5% payout requirement that private foundations would, which can be very burdensome. Take an illiquid gift, it hasn't sold yet. Now what do? You have to appraise it each year. Super complex. I have never personally seen any of these assets end up in a private foundation, in particular during life. And donor advised funds are put on this earth for these kinds of gifts. So you're able to take one donation, one sale, and then you can then have additional grants going out to multiple charities over time, versus trying to give it to multiple charities first, and maybe we're giving that farm to 4 different charities, let's say, to 4 charities, 25% undivided interest to each farm. You will never make that work. I'll buy you a pony and flowers, whatever you want me to buy you, and I'm cheap. I'll buy those things for you if you can actually make that gift through 4 charities. 4 different gift acceptance committees, 4 different processes, 4 different appraisals, 8283s, 8282s, versus one gift to a donor advised fund, one appraisal, one acknowledgement, selling then that farm, then make the grants back to the same 4 charities anyway. So that's more of a pass-through type model, or over time, or anonymously, and so forth. So that's the tax seminar. I think that was less than 5 minutes. I hope so. So then when I talk about the fair market value, that gets into the appraisal. So it's a qualified appraiser. Don't mess around with that definition. I underline that on purpose. IRS has a little checklist for exactly who a qualified appraiser is and who a disqualified appraiser would otherwise be. And then that person must complete a qualified appraisal. Also, don't mess around with that, underline on purpose. They also have a checklist, a 13-part USPAP appraisal that the qualified appraiser must complete. Has to occur as early as 60 days prior to the donation. That's the earliest point. The latest point is when the donor files his or her tax return for the year of the gift. What does that mean? the gift were made today, that appraisal could have gone back not to May, back to April, late April, April 29th, could have been when the appraisal was dated. That would still qualify if the donation were made today. That's the earliest point. Believe it or not, this is going to sound weird. If a gift were made today, the latest point would be October, technically 15th, 2023. 2023 is when the appraisal would have to be completed, because if the donor for the tax year 2022 extends his or her 2022 return, that would then be due October 15th, 2023. So it has to be done. Now, the appraisal is done retroactive to today. Still has a value today, but the point is you have a ton of time, ton of time to be able to have that appraisal completed. The appraiser then completes the Form 8283. The charity signs off on the 8283 saying, yes, we got it on that day. And then the charity has to fill out the tattletale form, Form 8282, letting the IRS know what it sold for gross. So that's the process of the appraisal. What are the considerations? The Pension Protection Act, August 17, 2006, super tightened up penalties on the appraiser. So everyone was concerned about appraisers puffing or inflating the value. Now the appraiser can be personally penalized for a percentage of the puffery. Say that 5 times fast. Personally penalized for the percentage of the puffery. So if he or she increases the appraised value over fair market value, personal penalty to the appraiser. So our firm does a ton of these appraisals for business interests. I do all the cryptocurrency, life insurance. We have art person, precious metal person, and so on. So we are super sensitive to making sure that it is a robust appraisal, but that can be fully justified, because if we start inflating that in any way, then obviously we would be put at risk. Could include some discounts. Remember, I said 75% of the gifts that we do not have the majority or the entire interest. It'd be the minority interest, like the Vikings gift or other gifts that we do that are 2% interest or 20% interest. In many of those cases, it's certainly appropriate to include a minority discount, either for lack of control or lack of marketability. A couple of things that we can do in concert with the appraiser to try to squeeze up or maybe even eliminate some of those things. You can do put options, you can do some timing issues, et cetera, but generally speaking, those are considerations. And the final piece is the donor. The donor is the taxpayer, is then required then to select, engage, and pay for the appraiser. So the charity cannot provide that appraisal. To the extent that you even pay for the appraisal, I think that's a really, really bad idea. We have a couple charities that do that, but then when they actually provide the acknowledgement letter and it says no goods or services were received in consideration of the gift, sort of that typical line. In fact, there was a service received in consideration of the gift. It was the appraisal. And so then you'd actually have to reduce the deduction by the amount of that service consideration, as an example. So now we'll talk about some challenges. So I've got this slide and 2 more, and that'll be it. So any Q&A that you want to go ahead and start populating there, I can see that there's some in there, but I haven't been able to read them yet. So again, Jen will help guide us through. So this is the slide. I already preemptively told you. I hope at this point you're like, oh my gosh, there are only 12 charities doing this, and I'm buying into the mega trend, and I see that super colorful chart with way too many blues on the Federal Reserve asset mix, and oh, we shouldn't be focused so much on the green. We should be focused on the dark blue. I'm ready, Brian. Take me to the promised land. I want to take you there, and you want to go there. So I'm not saying don't go. You want to go. But I also want to be very realistic that everything is not sort of puppies and unicorns and roses going through this. There can be some real challenges. So without saying that, I think would not be appropriate or accurate. So what are the big challenges? So big one is tax and legal complexity. Doing a transfer, electronic transfer of stock, Amazon stock, from the donor's account to your account, there isn't a lot of tax and legal complexity there. That's just a straight shot. Transfer this there. What about real estate? A little different. Is there debt? What about title issues? Looking at the deed. It's a process. What about private stock? Operating agreements, shareholders agreements, addendums to that, reps and warranty issues. All of these things, it's a little bit different, Brian. Now we're sort of getting into the water here, and not quite as easy perhaps as you made it, at least on the first 8 or 9 slides. The big one here is what's called a prearranged sale. Prearranged sale is bad. Lots of other tax and legal complexity, but that's the big one. And this is the rule. Generally, the rule is that if the donor already has a legally binding purchase and sale contract, it's too late. So if they've already signed a purchase and sale contract, it's all binding, and they say, okay, but it hasn't closed yet, and I don't want to pay all this money in tax, so I want to give a chunk of this over to the charity, the IRS says, you've already negotiated the sale. Basically, it just hasn't occurred yet, but it's going to because it's binding. And therefore, all the capital gains tax you thought you were getting out of all comes back on you phantom. That's called an assignment of income. They've given it away, but they're having to pay tax on it. Bad. About 2/3 or so of the donations that we do are in letter of intent stage. There's some things in writing, but every other word literally says, every other page, I should say, non-binding. Non-binding, non-binding, non-binding. So in that case, that obviously for most attorneys and accountants say that should be very comfortable. Clearly before then even better. But most donors want to say, I got a pretty good sense this is going to go through, but they can't know that it will. So that's the assignment of income issue. That kills, of the 8 calls that we get, probably 2 are too far along. That just is not going to work. The other one would be any kind of excess benefit or private inurement. Is the donor gaming this in some way? You're selling it to your son for less than fair market value, or something's going on. Maybe the donor says, oh, I'm a real estate broker, so I'm going to take a full real estate commission for myself. Some of these things are possible, some may not be possible, but they get real touchy. So the IRS has what's called the coffee cup rule, and if the donor or any other related party or disqualified person is getting more than like $12, I think that's the number, $13 maybe, like a coffee cup. If they're getting more than that, bad, like real bad to the charity, knowing that there was some kind of excess benefit. So tax and legal complexity, environmental issues. Obviously with real estate, everybody is freaked out that it's going to have contamination, environmental stuff, and groundwater supply, people glowing all the time, So this generally is not an issue. This is a boogeyman that charities create in a big way, make it out much larger than it is. If you drive out to the farm and you see those blue plastic tanks, there's nothing good ever in those tanks. Oh, it's milk. It's not milk, it's chemicals. And if those things are dripping and you have all kind of rainbows in the soil and dead animals are piled up, you can say, thanks for the offer. I think we're going to decline. Use some common sense. You can also hire other humans like us called environmental appraisers. They'll do an environmental appraiser called a phase 1, usually $400 to $600, generally speaking. And you know them because they have clipboards. They love clipboards. And they'll check a bunch of boxes, and they'll come back and they say, do I see anything? Do I smell anything? Phase 1. A little bit overstated there, but you get the point. If they find something there, then they call it phase 2. So there are a number of things from a common sense standpoint, and then always just from an environmental appraisal standpoint, that this is sort of in a week you sort of know what's going on. So charities will sort of make that a bigger issue. Management issues. Anything the donor is having to do, the charity has to do too. Anything. Oh my gosh, I've got this renter, he hadn't paid for 6 months. He is driving me crazy. I had one guy literally say, I want to give you this 3 quadruplexes, that's 12 units, because one of them I know is running drugs out of the place. I can't catch him. The police are after me trying to put surveillance up. I just can't deal with this anymore. I'm 77 years old. I'm done with it. And I'm thinking, I don't want to deal with the police. I don't want to deal with the drug guy. So they think that they give it to charity and things just poof away. There's no poofing. All their issues become our issues. I don't drive into work each day going, I'm looking for people's albatrosses or albatri, however multiple albatrosses is, to stick on my back. I'm not looking for that. So that's management issues. You want to be very careful. This becomes other duties as assigned to the business office. They do not like that. Charity's internal process kills more than everything combined. Most everybody has a gift acceptance committee, 4 to 6 people. I don't know why it's always 4 to 6. It takes them minimum 2 to 2.5 months, minimum, to meet the number of times, to ask all the questions, to get back to the donor. Usually the donor's bailed at that point or super upset. 3/4 of the gifts that we do are in letter of interest, LOI stage, to the point that it's likely a sale is coming up pretty quickly. Very important. So then if you tell the donor, at 2.5 months, we'll get back to you for the Minnesota Vikings to see whether you can sell it or not, they're going to get, what are you talking about? This is a huge delay. They're trying to protect reputation and deep pockets, totally understandable, but the charity's internal process is like watching sausage and laws made at the same time, painful. And the final piece here is perceived real risk reward ratio. We don't tend to do much less than about $200,000, $250,000. So they need to be sort of larger ones, no timeshares ever. ever. None has ever appreciated in value in the history of time. Stop having donors give you stupid timeshares. They can't sell them, so they want to give them to you, so you can't sell them. Don't do that. 2, anything that eats, bad. We did a quarter horse, wouldn't do that again. 3, anything with a steering wheel. Cars, boats, planes, all steering wheels, 2004 IRS rules ambled that whole area, plus their tangible personal property. So very tough. Generally speaking, you're going to say, oh, I know one charity. Okay, that's one charity. Generally, no timeshares, nothing that eats, nothing with a steering wheel, and never cemetery plots. Those are the worst things ever. The only thing you can do is bonus it out to the oldest person on staff who's doing the best job. That's it. You think that's a joke? Marge doing a great job. Here's eternal rest under the big oak tree. You're not getting a bonus this year. There, I said it. That's the only way you're getting it off the books, ever. They'd say, oh, give it to religious organizations or hospitals or healthcare and for indigent use, which makes sense until it's $1,000 to open the plot, $1,000 to close the plot. Where's that money coming from? Oh, I don't know. So anyway, ta-da, those are the challenges. So 2 quick case studies. First one is 4 doctors owned a $6 million medical building. They purchased it in the 70s. They were all older doctors. I think the oldest was maybe 70. The youngest was like 66, 67. They all wanted to retire. This was in eastern North Carolina, Greenville, North Carolina. And there were 6 junior doctors. And the 6 junior doctors wanted to buy the medical practice and buy the building. But the doctors, I told you, purchased the building back in the 70s. This was about 10 years ago. What do you think the basis in that building was after all the depreciation for over 30 years? 0. So they told the senior doctors, look, we don't really want to sell this to you because we're going to have all this capital gains tax. And every year, a real estate investment trust, a REIT out of Charlotte, called to want to buy the building. And they said, no, 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 we don't want to sell the building to you either, because now when we sell the medical practice, we're going to have all the building tax, and we're going to have all the medical practice tax. That's not going to work. So here's what happened, not super complex here. The junior doctors who were buying the medical practice said, don't you sell this building out from under us. This is where we've been having patients come for 30 years, and we're going to buy the practice. And they said, what we want is a long-term lease. What does the REIT want? A long-term lease, reasonable terms, same thing as the junior doctors. The junior doctors and the REIT investors went out for beer and barbecue, was after hours, beer and barbecue. They came up with a verbal agreement about what long-term lease reasonable terms would be. And then the senior doctor said, okay, what if we take a 20% interest, I'll give my little pointer here somewhere, 20% interest or $1.2 million and put that into 4 charitable remainder trusts. Then we'll do another 20% interest and put that into 4 donor-advised funds. They were not all 7%. I only have so much room on the chart here. 3 of the doctors was married, 1 was not. So 3 of them were going to be joint income for life. 1 was single income. 3 of the 4 had the remainder pour into the donor-advised funds. 1 had to go to their East Carolina Medical University for a medical scholarship over there that he had created during life. So if they gave away 20% to the remainder trust, maybe got a 15-20% deduction based on age and payout-ish. They gave away 20% of the building to the donor-advised fund, got a full fair market value deduction for that. They gave away then 40% interest, holding back 60%. They didn't give the whole thing away. The math didn't work perfect. It was close. Close, where all the deductions from this side of the equation almost made the remaining 60% sale tax neutral, real close. Then that allowed them to move forward. Once they put the money there, the REIT came in and bought the building from the doctors to 60%, and the other 40% here. Then they turned around and executed a long-term lease with the junior doctors based on their verbal agreement. And then the point is that then the senior doctors were able to sell their practice over a 5-year earn-out. So it was able to smooth out all of that potential tax that otherwise they would have. What just happened? They were able to use the lowest cost basis, long-term capital gain property they had, the building, to create retirement income, sell that completely tax-free within the charitable remainder trusts, have 3 of the 4 drop into the donor advised fund for the next generation of giving that's in essence pre-funded. And then they also pre-funded all of their retirement giving using the lowest cost basis, most highly appreciated capital gain property that they had using the donor advised funds, all out of their estate for estate tax purposes, and then made the tax neutral, close to a tax neutral sale for the amount that they held back. They were very happy. 2 of the doctors actually bought other life insurance to replace this amount. One was for the kids, one was for the grandkids. 2 said they're good. I'm not worried about it. So ways to sort of be able to build in the heirs as well. That's basically it. One important point here too is you're talking about a $2.4 million donation. So when could they have the appraisal done? They could have done it early, and we said, no. Wait to do the appraisal until after it sells. Most appraisers will use that if it sells pretty quickly as an appropriate, at least variable, for the appraisal. Because normally if you're having a minority interest, that might be a 20% or so discount, 20 or 30%, 30% is actually more common. 30% on $2.4 million is $800,000 discount, poof. Versus waiting until after the sale, then they actually have the actual sale at an arm's length transaction for the full $6 million. Or they could use an income approach versus a market approach, which then is not discounted. So there are multiple ways that you could potentially get to a higher value. And the final slide, which I'll do a little bit quickly here, I think I've got 12:53 your time, 1:53 mine, is a C corporation. So tons of C corporations out there, even more S corporations, but that's a story for another day. But and you've all heard this, but I want to do it quickly. Let's say the mother created her private business. She owns it. She created it in her garage. All successful businesses created in their garage. And it's 70% is what she owns of her business, private business. And let's go back to this mega trend. Now maybe she's thinking about retiring. Her daughter owns 10, son owns 10, key employee owns 10. You know exactly where I'm going with this. You've probably seen this at every conference. So she owns her C corporation. Let's say that she creates a $1 million donor-advised fund of her closely held C corporation stock she gives to a donor-advised fund, or can give directly to the hospital, or can give directly to the university. It doesn't have to be a donor-advised fund. Any public charity. She's been able to get a full fair market value deduction for that $1 million gift, if that's what the appraised value is. And then the company simply just buys it back. It uses retained earnings in her own C Corp to buy those shares back for the $1 million and then retires those shares into Treasury. What just happened? Use the lowest cost basis stock. I guarantee it's 57 cents a share, always 57 cents a share. Super appreciation, long-term gain asset. That's the holy grail. She's probably been giving cash bad. Now she's giving long-term capital gain property over to the charity. Probably never thought she could even do that. Buys that back, less shares outstanding. What just happens to the ownership of her daughter, son, and key employee? Up. It all goes up because they own the same number of shares with less shares outstanding. It creates business succession planning using charitable giving, and it gets out of her estate as well. We used to do tons of these, tons at the community foundations in particular. But it can go any nonprofit directly, does not matter. Could this happen? This is where the company is buying it back. What about prior to a merger or acquisition, new funding round, a current investor, a new investor, an employee stock ownership program? Yes. Anytime that there's going to be an exit, prior to that being a legally binding agreement, make the donation of that interest over to the charity, and then simply whatever that group is, rather than the company redeem it back, a new investor would just buy those shares from the charity. The current investor would buy them from the charity. The merger acquisition would redeem them through the charity. And that's it. So with that, I will close. I hope this has been helpful. We'll have a couple questions. The big themes are cash, bad, everything else good. This is a mega trend that's occurring to a super small number of charities who are participating. So I hope this is helpful in sort of what you're doing. And again, I'll open this up, Jen, for any questions.
Thanks, Brian. First of all, fun fact, the Stelter company was started in a garage in 1962 by Nathan's grandfather, Paul. So yes, all successful companies.
Always in a garage.
Always,
so you have to, if you're thinking about a business to start, we're like, where's my garage? And then you go in there and you start your business. So.
That's right. Okay, Stephen would like to know what recommendations you have to discover these ideal non-cash donors, especially because traditional plan giving marketing doesn't really uncover them. He lists some of his challenges that he's had with that, but do you have any recommendations on uncovering these?
Sure, it's a great question. So you may not be able to cover all of those, and this is going to be very snarky. Everybody, I would bet, 90% of the people on this call own their house. So right now, I know you own real estate. I don't need to do a whole lot of prospect research to sort of figure that out. And so certainly for larger major gift donors, if they're working with their own private business, or you're able to sort of see that just on Google in 5 minutes, certainly I think some we'll call random plan giving, great marketing companies, we'll just name one, like Stelter, can be able to help with some of that piece relative to communications and to be able to find some discovery. I am horrible on that side, to be very blunt. We really rely on partners like Stelter and others to have the marketing, asking the right questions, right time, right way, to sort of shake the proverbial bushes. If stuff falls out, we can reel them in, fillet them up, and cook them, but we're not good about shaking the bushes. So I think that I would really defer back to your Stelter team to do that. But I think a lot of this is a common sense that a lot of people just sort of own these anyway. You see the Federal Reserve chart showing you, again, in the aggregate what people own, and it's not the cash stuff, especially at that $1 million or $10 million level and above. I think it'd be overly presumptive to think that they didn't own some of these types of things, at least real estate or privately held business interests.
Colleen wants to know of the dozen or so charities that are having great success with gifts of these types of assets. Excuse me, do they tend to work with a third party to help process the gift, or do they handle it in-house? And if they do work with a third party, can you name some of those?
Sure. Usually they actually are the third party to some extent. So Fidelity Charitable does a massive amount. We do a massive amount. National Christian Foundation does a massive amount. Silicon Valley Community Foundation, many, many, many large community foundations are very active in this space. And this is going to sound weird. I could probably name 3 or 4 others, and then I'd probably pause for about 2 or 3 minutes because I wouldn't know who the next ones are. That's how concentrated this is. We all know each other. We all talk to each other all the time. And all of us say each time we talk, the growth in volume is unbelievable. How do we keep up? How do we keep staffing? And it's just us saying that, not other charities that frankly should be, because for many of those charities, those are your donors. I don't know who your donors are, but those are your donors going to those charities to help facilitate those kinds of gifts.
We are out of time, so I just wanted to say 2 more things. Carolyn is asking if you know of a seminar on S Corp donations, either outright or to our CRT, that you could point her to.
Sure, I've got some on my website, so you can see there the CharitableSolutionsLLC.com, and so we do a lot with S Corps and certainly others. Dr. James, I think, has done some in that area too. But all of our webinars, we've got about 20 or so, are sort of free and available, and you can just download them. But we also have a book. I'm happy to send this out, Nathan and Jen, if helpful. Charitable Gifts of Non-Cash Assets. It's free. It's on our website. You just download the book. But it is 360 pages of non-cash goodness, and one of those chapters is just on S Corps.
Fantastic. And then I just want to mention, you said Russell James, cash is not king, Google it now. I just want to let people know that Russell James did that webinar for us a few years ago. So if you go to stelter.com/webinars, you can find the recording and the slides. And then he's also done 2 other ones since then, where he uses that research to kind of branch out and teach you more about how to go after those gifts, how to convince your board that those gifts are important too. So you can get those on our website, stelter.com/webinars. And with that, Nathan, unless you had a question you wanted to pose.
No, again, just always love hearing you speak, Brian. Great information, some great comments and questions. I know that we didn't get to all of them. Obviously, another person asked, we'll get a copy of these slides, and I'll let Jen address that as we close our time. But thank you, Brian, so much.
Yeah, so I just want to say,
So
I wanted to say that Brian has offered his email address. We didn't get to all your questions. You can reach out to him if you'd like. Brian Clance at CharitableSolutionsLLC.com. You can also reach out to Nathan or myself. You can visit us at Stelter.com to learn more about Stelter. And yes, we are recording, and you will get a copy of the handouts and a link to the recording. I should have that ready for you by Friday, and I'll send an email out to everyone to let you know when it's ready. So that's that. That wraps up the hour for us. Thank you so much, Brian, once again, for spending the hour with us and your expertise. And thank you to all of our plan giving professionals that joined us today. I think we had around 300 people with us. So it's a wonderful use of the last hour.
Sounds great. Thanks, guys, so much. Hope it's helpful.
Thanks. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Bye-bye.